There's a fascinating race going on in the Democratic primary in New York State. And Jamal Bowman is being challenged by a fellow who has actually a pretty grim record. Now, the challenger here in Oregon, when Sheila Jayapal, Pramila Jayapal's sister, was running for Congress for Earl Blumenauer's district, she was challenged by a local physician who's actually a pretty reasonable progressive, just had no profile and had no chance of winning. AIPAC came in here in Oregon because Sheila Jayapal had criticized the Netanyahu administration and just wiped her out. I mean, just swamped us with millions and millions of dollars worth of negative advertising, attacking Jayapal and lifting up her opponent. They're trying to do the same thing right now in New York with Jamal Bowman. And the latest thing that they've jumped on is his saying, and he said this, he said, when you as Israel say that you represent all Jews and then you behave badly, it opens the doors for people to make the connection between what Israel is doing and Jewish people, which I think is freaking dangerous as hell. Now, they're attacking him, saying that he's an anti-Semite because he's saying that criticizing those people who say you can't criticize Israel because to do so is anti-Semitism are wrong. And I think he's absolutely right. And, you know, we'd love to hear your opinions on this. But the simple reality, Congressman Dan Goldman is leading the charge against him, you know, pushing back. And the guy that Bowman is running against has also been endorsed by Hillary Clinton. You know, the Clintons deeply in the pocket of AIPAC and always have been. And probably Daniel Goldman too, although I don't know. But the bottom line is that, as Noah Berlatsky points out in his newsletter today, his Substack newsletter, he says Zionists, Jewish and non-Jewish, far-right and liberal, do in fact constantly claim that Israel speaks for and represents all Jewish people. And he's got a whole series of quotes from Netanyahu saying that. He repeatedly says that he speaks on behalf of all the Jews in the world. He says, Netanyahu, for example, said, Jews know deep in their hearts that they have only one country, Israel. He said, in the same year, he said, Netanyahu is one of his top aides said, Netanyahu is the leader of the Jewish world. He's not, he's the leader of Israel. In 2006, Ehud Olmert, who was then the prime minister of Israel, said that Israel's war against Hezbollah in Lebanon was, quote, a war fought by all the Jews. Not true. The mission statement of the Israeli mission to the United Nations says, quote, Israel's permanent mission represents the state of Israel, its citizens, and the Jewish people on the global stage of the United Nations. You know, not necessarily true. There are a lot of Jews who would say Israel does not represent their worldview. And, you know, just like there are Catholics who would say the Pope doesn't represent me, although they're probably fewer and farther between. Judaism does not demand the same kind of conformity and the same kind of hierarchy that Catholicism does, for example. But this is, you know, what Jamal Bowman is saying, I think is absolutely right. You're seeing people in the United States who are rightly horrified by Netanyahu's efforts to keep himself out of jail, the brutality of his efforts in Gaza, the brutality and violence and illegality of his efforts continuing to support the settler movement on the West Bank. These are things that are violations of international law, arguably are violations of Israeli law. And Netanyahu is thumbing his nose at America and the rest of the world, and the Biden administration seems impotent at the face of this. It's the thing that is really hurting Joe Biden with young Democrats. And the extent to which Netanyahu claims that he represents all Jews in the world is the extent to which Jewish people in the United States, for example, are on the receiving end of genuine anti-Semitism that is being generated by people watching the horrors, the starvation, the famine that's going on in Gaza right now, and blaming it on Jews rather than blaming it on Netanyahu. Netanyahu, yes, is Jewish, and Israel is, yes, a Jewish state, although about 20% of its citizen population is actually Muslim, is Arab. But nonetheless, that does not mean that Netanyahu speaks for every Jew in the world. And Noah Berlatsky, who himself is Jewish, makes that point. He doesn't speak for me, he says. And I think his pointing this out, he says, blaming all Jews for anything done by one Jew or some Jews is definitionally anti-Semitism. It creates grounds for collective guilt, collective punishment, anti-Semitic stereotypes, and anti-Semitic violence. And, he says basically what it is saying that Jewish people as a whole are responsible for Israel's actions, which is not true. He says Israel in the last 6 months has killed or injured some 120,000 people in Gaza, the vast majority women and children. The state of Israel did that, not Jewish people as a whole, not American Jews, not, and Jamal Bowman is absolutely right. He's basically blaming Zionist propaganda, I think you could argue. And this is the phrase that Noah Berlatsky uses. And by conflating Israel and Jewish identity. Now, I get it that there are many Jews who are just, Israel right or wrong no matter what. But there are many who are not. And this idea that's being promoted by AIPAC in this race, where they're throwing millions and millions of dollars into promoting and elevating Jamal Bowman's opponent in the primary, knowing that whoever wins the primary is in all probability going to win the general election. Like I said, it's the same thing they did here in Oregon. The Oregon race got very little publicity because neither of the candidates were actual members of Congress who had high profiles. But largely everybody knows who Jamal Bowman is. He's outspoken, he's African American, he's on television a lot, he's a member of Congress, and he's a good guy. So, I just want to say to my listeners and viewers in New York State who are in his district, this primary election tomorrow is going to be, and there's early voting going on right now, I believe, is a very, very important one. And Jamal Bowman deserves to be reelected, and AIPAC should not be spending millions of dollars. I think they've spent $14 million in this race. They spent like $3 or $4 million here in Oregon in this little congressional district. Only 700,000 people. This is just wrong. A foreign government or an agent of a foreign government should not be working to influence U.S. elections. I think it's just plain old flat out wrong. Meanwhile, speaking of Judaism, Barbara Rez, who was Donald Trump's secretary for decades, and finally quit because she said she was no longer willing to tolerate his, quote, explosive moods. She was on MSNBC on Sunday morning, and she said the following. She said, like it was funny that Hannibal Lecter ate people reminded me of the time when Trump had just hired a residential manager, a German guy, and Trump was bragging amongst executives about how great the guy was, and he was a real gentleman and so neat and clean. And then he looked at a couple of our executives who happened to be Jewish, and he said, watch out for this guy, he sort of remembers the ovens, and then smiled. Everybody was shocked, she said. He was making a joke about the Nazi ovens and eating people. And yeah, this is Donald Trump. He's a big fan of the Nazis. His first wife, Ivana, has, before she died, falling down the stairs, sort of like Putin's opponents. And then got buried on his golf course and wife cemetery, his Roach Motel golf course wife cemetery. She wrote in her autobiography and told reporters that Donald Trump had one book, apparently in the whole apartment, and it sat on the next to his bed, and it was the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler. And we're seeing him literally use that rhetoric now. So I think a fascism alert is, definitely in order, and we need to be talking about this and pointing this out. This is not a healthy thing for a democracy. It's 16 minutes past the hour. Trump stumbles too much even for Fox News. I've got to show this to you on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.